We're going to start relatively on time then, and we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Milton Adcott, for those that don't know me. This is a presentation on an overview of developing your clinical educator's portfolio. Jen Mosher, who admitted you, is really the brains behind the operation and kind of help set the wheels in motion. I will refer you guys throughout the talk to the Office of Faculty Development's website through the Department of Medicine. It has a lot of this information there. It also has sample CEPs along with tip sheets, including some new things that were added this year, along with a connection to a shared Wustelbox drive that has some of these documents as well. The focus today is not on the CV as much as it is the CEP, and we'll distinguish that as we go through. And obviously the purpose of this is to help everyone here on the call get promoted and really just accurately document all the things that you guys do. All right, so we'll just kind of go through. The purpose of today is I'll have a quick sort of overview, PowerPoint kind of highlighting some of that stuff, and then we're going to divide into some smaller groups that Jen has assigned, and we have moderators for each group so that you guys can, with your moderator, look at your CV, look at your CEP if you have one. If you don't, we'll help you develop it, and then really just in a workshop type fashion, kind of put pen to paper and start developing that. So if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to ask it. Again, this is the website for the Office of Faculty Development through the internal medicine website, through DOM. This is the contact number, which will get you to Jen. Both Angela Brown and myself are the co-chairs for this. So again, here's sort of the agenda that we're going to go through. And I won't read this through. You guys can all read it just fine. The purpose of the Office of the Faculty of Development is to help. So we're here to provide guidance, help you guys really navigate through the various things that Dom asks us to do, foster your professional and personal development in a supportive environment. Okay, so one thing I will say is that the template that we're going to go through today for both the CEP is very DOM specific. If you go to WashU School of Medicine website, it will direct you to certain CEP templates. That is very similar, but not exactly what Dr. Frazier wants for DOM. Similarly, there are ways to enter data to create a CV through the School of Medicine, which is fine and appropriate and has, again, similar content, but it's not exactly the format that Dr. Frazier wants. So your promotion process does go through your department. And so what we're really guiding you here is what Department of Medicine wants. Occasionally, and that might be the case today, people will join the call that are not part of the Department of Medicine, and you are welcome to be here. But there are some little quirks along the way that if your department is outside of the Department of Medicine, may request that you do differently than the way Dom does. Just a heads up there. All right, so I think everyone kind of feels like they're on the gerbil wheel at times, and you know, you're working really hard and it seems like you're standing still, and then people are just assessing you from the side and simply telling you you're not going anywhere. But a lot of this has to do with your ability to document what you're doing along the way. I think in really all phases of careers, people always talk about updating your CV and staying on top of that, and I think this is definitely essential. I would say at minimum, twice a year, set aside some time, look at your CV and see what you've done. The clinical educator portfolio is just an extension of that, but it is far more descriptive than what's on the CV, and so definitely something you'll want to really set aside dedicated time to update. There are other things that are part of your portfolio that may become applicable when it comes time to promotion, including, but not necessarily, all of the other things listed here on the PowerPoint. But the point is you guys do a lot, and sometimes we figure, oh, that's just part of my job, I'm not going to write it. But each of you have a slightly different job and put forth various different efforts for some of these things. And I think until you put pen to paper, it's really hard to give you credit for unless you say, I spend this many hours per week, every week for so long, and until you put pen to paper, it's really hard to give credit unless you're documenting what you're doing. And the people that do evaluate you are busy, right? So while they're well-intentioned and they want to see you succeed, they're not going to know all the things that you're doing unless you write down all the things that you're doing. I would never assume that they know everything that you're doing. I would definitely take the path of documenting it, because that's going to be far more accurate. In terms of discussing these sorts of issues, with your leaders, whether it's your chiefs or chairs and so forth, whoever you designated as your professional mentors, you'll want to meet with them regularly. Again, I would say at the very minimum once a year, although more often is probably necessary, but you don't want it to be a passive encounter. When you meet with them, be up to date on your portfolio, have good documentation on what you've done on your CV, and also where you are going. What do you want to do? If you're uncertain, what questions do you have? How do you, navigate that path to get there? Again, if you don't ask the questions, and if you're not an active mentee in the process, it's really hard to give good advice to a mentee unless you know really what it is that they're looking for. All right, so the promotions process, as you would imagine, is complex. Again, a lot of this information is on the faculty development website, so I, again, will continue to refer you back. But there is a school-wide promotions process for the various levels to assistant professor, to associate, and to full, including the requirements and the suggested activities and reputation, along with academic credentials that would get you through that. That's what the APGAR document is, which is really the promotional guideline. In terms of when you are up for promotion, there's a series of filters and checkpoints that your CV and CEP will be evaluated by, both inside and outside Department of Medicine, before the decision is made. And it does take time. So the timeline here is for those that are on a research or tenure track. So the example here is a generic name, PhD, but I think you can see it's a 10-year process. This is specific to researchers who are on a tenure track. Most clinicians in the clinician educator pathway are not on a tenure track, and so this would not be applicable to you. But if you work with someone, if you are an advisor to someone or a superior to someone on this track, it is important to understand the promotional process that they're going through. This is probably more applicable to most for clinician educators who are up for promotion in terms of the process and how it goes through. Again, you don't necessarily need to commit this to memory, but I think if you see the various time points, you can see if you add it all up, this could easily take up 6 months minimum up to a year to navigate through all the checkpoints and all the approval processes. And so that's where your accuracy of documentation is important, because you'd hate to get 3 to 6 months into this only to realize that your documentation is incomplete or insufficient, because then if you have to go through it again, it restarts that clock and it just delays your promotion. Okay, so when you have your documents, you'll want it to be in presentation ready form. I think simple things should be checked for spelling and grammar and the like, and there are formatting suggestions so that there's not a lot of wasted space. Again, all of those sort of nitty-gritties are laid out on the website along with what we'll show you here. Just re-emphasizing, this is based on what Dr. Fraser wants and what is necessary for Department of Medicine promotional processes. So for the CV, there are strict outline formats that are suggested. This is, I think self-explanatory in terms of this formatting process. This is all on the checklist that's on the website, but there are specific recommendations: how big your font should be, what should be bolded, what font in general should be used, margins, so on and so forth. One of the things that's unique for the Department of Medicine is the inclusion of a photograph on your CV. That is not a school-wide necessity, but it is a DOM-specific necessity for sure. This is an example. If you were to go, and look up WashU School of Medicine, how to input your CV, there's a WashU profile system or the WHOOP system, which is an online CV data entry link, which is great in that if someone were to look up your profile online, they could click it and see your CV that's been pre-populated. However, when you go through the promotions process within the Department of Medicine, it does need to be in a Word document. So the templates that are given to you on the faculty development website are going to be Word document templates that you'll adjust. So you don't have to use this. This is a school link, but not a DOM link. But just sometimes when you start looking up things on the School of Medicine website and how do I put in the CV, you may get directed to this. And I just want you to understand this is for the school, but not a specific format for DOM. Okay, so the focus today, though, is primarily the Clinician Educator portfolio. Again, I think most relevant for those on the Clinician Educator track, occasionally also for those on the Investigator track, but most investigators, their promotional process is derived based on funding, grants and publication and things that are outlined on the research track. But for the clinicians, the CEP provides a way to really expand upon all the things that you do that sometimes the CV doesn't capture. So from a high level view, that's really what should be taken away is the CEP captures things that cannot be fully understood just by looking at your CVs. So your CEP should have a lot more words. It should have a lot more detail. It should have a lot more explanation for things that may be line items in your CV. So your CEP probably will be significantly longer than your CV. If your CEP is not longer than your CV, you may be selling yourself short. Okay, so it is a supplement to the traditional CV. It's not meant to just be a mirror copy. It should be longer. It should be more descriptive and elaborative. There is a template on which to follow, which is the purpose of the workshop. Really to highlight all the things, again, that you do that sometimes just don't come out by looking at a CV. Again, this is something that needs to be updated. I would continuously reflect on your CEP and see that you are adjusting it and growing it appropriately for all the things that you guys continue to do. It should also include things like personal missions and what your career goals are and objectives. It gives a little bit more of a story as to why you take on the projects that you do or the missions that you do, and it tells a story in terms of your evolution over the years as faculty here. For those that have been around long enough, there was a template for the CEP that was in place prior to 2019. Over the last 2 years, there's been a new template. There's been a few workshops since then, sort of highlighting the changes. Definitely most should be converted to the post-2019 template. They are minor differences, but they are differences, and we can highlight that when we get into our little subgroups. Again, there is some formatting for the CEP itself, all available to you on the website, so not something you need to commit to memory or necessarily be taking notes for right now. I think chronology is important, and while I want you to be elaborative and really expand upon what you do, you still want to be concise with your words, right? You don't want to be droning on, but you do want to give yourself credit where credit is due. One of the things that we wanted to highlight today was just how different 2020 was with COVID. And I think with COVID, you see a lot of potential opportunities where people have grown in non-traditional ways. And I think many of you guys spent a lot of time doing things COVID related, and you should get credit and give yourself credit for all the things you did that were COVID related. And this is a document that's on the website. I think this is one of those things that we really wanted to emphasize today to add to your CEP. And again, we'll go through this with the various work groups, but it is divided in subcategories which match fairly nicely with some of the categories on the CEP. Now, these are things that you either had to adjust time because of, research was halted because of COVID, new research wasn't active that is COVID specific, media relations, community service, Clinical duties might have been altered. Perhaps you worked on a service that you wouldn't have worked on normally, but because of COVID, you found yourself working floors, ICUs, occupational health, any of those things. These are opportunities where you guys step forward, but you want, again, give yourself credit for what you did during that time. The components of the CEP are clinical, educational, community service, inclusion of annual summaries, and then, the ubiquitous other section for things that maybe aren't fully well captured in the prior categories. Just a breakdown of those subsections. The clinical activities, I think, are fairly self-explanatory, but you want to list where you did the work, the type of work you were doing, the time commitment that you had with those responsibilities as well. And so here's an example of a CEP highlighting clinical contributions. I think this is far more expansive than what you would see on a CV in terms of talking about the number of patients seen over a period of time, how many weeks of the year are worked, location of where that's done, concomitant responsibilities in terms of supervision. And I think it's fairly illustrative here how much more expansive this dialogue is than anything you would write on a CV. Just expanding on that. But you can see someone who has a variety of roles over various years, and just expanding on what they're doing gives you a much clearer picture of the work that's involved with this clinician. Okay. Other things that can go under clinical activity has to do with improvements in quality or efficiency of giving care. Whether that's outreach clinics, whether that's development of new guidelines or new protocols, QI initiatives in your arena. Maybe that was something that you did by yourself. Maybe that's something that you were part of a collaborative. Either way, this would be another example. Administrative duties, oversight of mid-level providers. Again, all things that truly require your time and your expertise that you should be giving yourself credit for. Any direct clinical contributions, again, in relation to COVID. So in terms of research, I think traditional, funded grants don't necessarily need to go on the CEP. That can stay on your CV. As that's self-explanatory, but involvement in clinical trials or grants, things that wouldn't pop off on a CV, including admin duties, leadership duties, involvement with industry-sponsored clinical trials. If you had some adjunctive or consultative role or collaborative role, those are all things that you should be listing, again, given your time and contribution and how that may not be self-explanatory as a line item on your CV. Case report reviews, and then feedback. There's a variety of ways to get feedback. I think if you get feedback from patients, handwritten notes, online reviews, the faculty practice plan also has access to patient survey data. These are all things that I would collate because those are always options to add in as well. Direct teaching sessions, your involvement in a course, perhaps an informal teaching session, education of students and residents. Again, all things that I think each of you do on a daily basis. And I think the bottom line really summarizes what we keep saying is don't undervalue yourself. It may just be something like, this is just part of my job, this is what I do, but it takes time, and it's something that, distinguishes you as a clinician that you are in a way that others really benefit from, and that you really add value to the school, and so it's worth highlighting. All right, other educational contributions would include things like curriculum development, whether it's a new course or an update on a current course. Definitely mention who it is that you're teaching, whether it's cross-specialty, whether it's to the students in the med school, fellows, residents, et cetera. There is a time involved with that, not just in the delivering of the content, but in the developing of the content. That takes a lot of time offline that is worth writing down. Otherwise, it just comes off as a 1-hour lecture. But if that took 20 hours of work to get to, well, that took 20 hours of work to get to, and now you multiply it by multiple lectures. I think that's worth highlighting the effort that you put in to develop that content. Again, there may be COVID-specific education that was done to staff, to students, to residents, and to colleagues. Lots of opportunities. We all, I think, learned a lot in 2020, but it is worth highlighting. And then leadership positions within education, both at the school or outside the school, are worth mentioning. Learner assessments, again, feedback is important. Definitely collect feedback wherever you give talks, collate that, because I think those are important things so we get a clearer sense of how you are viewed when you have these clinical activities. All right, so other things that you guys may be doing, developing new methods of education, new courses. I think there's lots of things in the various specialties that start on a whim. They start sort of unstructured lunchtime talks, after hours, whiteboard sessions, things that become a consistent thing that I think are highly valued by learners. And so because of that value that you're providing for those that do it, make sure that you document what it is that you're doing. Your role as a mentor and how you've impacted current and former trainees is worth citing. Not only what you did in that moment of time, but where those mentees ended up later on. And so it's important to see what your developing family tree essentially is. That really speaks to your role as a clinician educator, your role as a mentor, your outreach at the school level. For people that go on, they're at various institutions, what practice they're in, what their role is nationally, especially given the fact that you probably had a central role in their growth. So keep track of those people that you mentor and the trainees that you've influenced in a significant way over the years. And again, feedback. Feedback is important. Awards you may have received along the way. There's obviously traditional publications, but there's a lot of non-traditional publications that I think sometimes don't always have a clean spot to go on your CV. A lot of online forums, blogs, MedEd portal, POGOE. These are, educational websites for medical education, for geriatrics. Just, again, online education, I think, takes, again, still a lot of work, but isn't the classic PubMed searchable bibliography, but nonetheless was content that you developed, and it's worth keeping track of, in addition to your traditional books and chapters and traditional publications. Participation in university work, I think is self-explanatory, but again, not just listing what it is that you were a part of, but the time that was involved in those activities are important to document. I think the involvement in local, regional, and national committees are not only important to document, to give yourself credit, but I mean, this is one of the central things that are going to be important when it comes in the promotional process. As you go up the promotional ladder, I think one of the things that's viewed is not only how you are viewed in the local community here at the School of Medicine, but how you are viewed as a leader in your own right in your fields, regionally, nationally, and then oftentimes internationally over the years. Again, I think media activities, it's hard to really capture the extent of what it is that you may be doing on the CV. There's a lot more opportunity to expand on this in the CEP. And plenty of options over the last year with COVID for both volunteerism or media contributions for many of you as well. So as a contrast in terms of again, just what we talked about when we talk about being expansive, if you're a clerkship director on the left, you can see you would simply write on your CV that you're a clerkship director, and that's all you would put on your CV. But on the right, you can talk about what your various roles were along the way, the amount of time that you put in, perhaps specific leadership roles within those things as it's related to. If it's something you did, it's worth writing down on the CEP because it won't always translate on a CV. Annual summaries, you can decide if you want to keep it or not. Your chiefs and chairs have that record as is, so they have that available to them, but it's still something that you can keep with yourself as well to be organized. And then anything else that you think just doesn't get captured, but took a lot of time and effort and helps define you and who you are as a clinician here in DOM, then I would include that in your CEP. So I'll end by just saying, again, a lot of this, if not all of this, is online. The faculty development website has a variety of links discussing the promotions process, discussing some of these COVID-specific activities that you could add, giving you templates for your CV and for your CEP, along with contact numbers. And, you do your best to construct a talk like this to fit all the unique paths that each of you take. If you have questions, just reach out. And so Dr. Brown, myself, Jennifer, anybody is happy to take the question and answer it to the best of our ability. And if we don't know, then we look into it and we can always just go directly to Dr. Fraser too and kind of see if it's a recurring pattern of questions that we see. But that's really how this has been developed over the years. So if anybody has questions for the group, I'm happy to take them. But I think at this point, I wanted to leave plenty of time for us to get into our small groups, go over our CVs and see if we can figure out a way for those that need the help or the guidance to translate that into your CEP. Some of you already sent in the CEP that you have existing, which is great. So we can work off of that in small groups and grow that where it deems fit or answer questions.
There are, there's also some questions in the chat box.
Okay, let me pull that up. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say my question from the chat box. I've collected cards and notes from patients and trainees that I've worked with over the years, and I didn't know how to put those things into this document. If I just retype them, or if I need to scan them, or prove that they exist.
I think I would save it. I would save the actual document, right? You can always use it as an attachment, but I think if someone were reading through, it's cumbersome to always refer back to a supplement or always refer back. So if you wanted to keep it as a hard copy to include it, I think that's fine, but I think I would just include the quotes of how you reviewed in the CEP, because that way, if you're looking at it from the other side, if you're reviewing that document, you just want to read through and say, so-and-so said this about her, so-and-so said this about her, and you would go through. I'm sorry for not paying attention to the chat box along the way. So first question was examples of what's on the CEP but not the CV. I think we alluded to that along the way, but seeing if I didn't answer that, let me know and I can do that again.
Oh, you covered it. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so Mauricio just joined Worcester, doing my CEP. In the future, does my previous efforts, my previous university have to be added? I would add that for sure. I think this is a universal document on how Department of Medicine views you as faculty for the promotions process. And so even though some of that work was done at another institution, it really does define who you are and the effort you've put into it. You would be promoted in the future, not solely based on what your work was at WashU, but rather what your work was as an academic clinician over the breadth of your career. And so, no, absolutely, I would include that, Mauricio.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Morali. Just to follow up on that, one point out or clarification, I guess. When I had to do this a few years ago, it was well after I started on faculty. The rule at that point was that Vicki had suggested going back only 5 years. So if you're kind of mid-career and have been doing this for a while and now putting this together for the first time, not trying to resurrect things that might be 10 years old and stuff. If that's still true, it might be worth stating that here because some people may really struggle to capture all this when it's probably not necessary.
100%. No, I think that's great feedback. And Dr. Fraser does sort of evolve over time in terms of her feedback on that and what she views as being relevant, but I think that's great feedback. Let's see, we did the handwritten notes. Shivani's asking if we can get a copy of the PowerPoint. I don't see why not. Jen, this is online, is it not?
Yes, I'll post a copy of the PowerPoint and the audio recording from today once it's processed on the website, and then I'll send an email so that you all know how to access it.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is for this to be a resource, not for you guys to scramble for notes. And then Janice, so MedEd publications are peer reviewed and are now, okay, so they're in PubMed. So I think that's great. Yeah, I think that's great feedback. And but to your point, Janice, you're right. Some of the stuff that's not PubMed searchable, but that's clearly curriculum development, you still want to capture. Okay. Any other questions for the group setting, or are we ready to divide into our small groups? All right. So Jen, can you coordinate us into our breakout rooms?
Yes, I will add you to your breakout rooms.